Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and today I'm coming to you with kind of a requested video regarding Colt rifles, and more specifically the rifles that they're currently making for the civilian market. I get asked about these a lot in my live stream, so I thought I would finally make a video about them because I actually got one of the new lower receivers that was made since Colt resumed production. So if you don't know what I'm talking about a year and a half ago, or maybe it was even 2 years ago, Colt announced that they were going to stop production of civilian AR-15s. A lot of people thought it was pressure from anti-gunners. Others thought it was the fact that Colt was just getting out of the civilian AR market because it is flooded with so many competitors and their price point was so high. But whatever their reason was, well, I guess ostensibly they said it was because they wanted to focus on military contracts for a certain period of time. And there was this big backlash, and a lot of people said that they were never going to buy Colt again because they were caving in to anti-gunners. Well, after a period of time, 6 months or so, they announced that they were coming back out with new rifles. And it turned out that these rifles were a little bit different than their old ones. So a lot of questions got asked. What's different about them? Are they all made in Hartford, Connecticut in the Colt factory? Are they farming out parts? Are they trying to cut corners? What have they changed? And a lot of people that got their hands on the new production rifles have said they're not as good. They believe that the parts are being farmed out, that there's subcontract work going into them, and that they don't deserve the higher price point. Well, I finally got a lower receiver from one of the new runs. So this gun, as you see it, is actually made up of an upper receiver that is a military surplus A2 upper that is unfired. So this is an actual like military contract upper. I've had it in the safe for a while, but I didn't have a proper lower receiver to mate with it. People have been telling me, oh, you need to go to Palmetto State or get one of the other ones or make it 80% and have the correct roll marks put on it or laser engraved, this and that. I really just wanted a Colt factory one, and I've been having a hard time finding any old A2 marked AR-15 lowers that weren't pretty much ratted out. Well, on Gunbroker, I found this lower receiver right here, which is one of the new productions, and it had the A2 stock, and it would just kind of fit the gun correct and also be a Colt marked. Well, I've had some time to kind of take a look at it, look at what I guess they're producing now, and I guess what they're calling now the CR line of rifles. I'm not even sure what CR stands for. Some people say it's something completely different than the old LE rifles, which of course stood for law enforcement, which actually I have one of my 2012 or 2013 production 6920s out here that I'm going to compare the lower receivers to and just kind of see what the differences are. But being a Colt fan and kind of a Colt collector, I thought that I would try to make a video about this and present to you guys my thoughts on maybe what the differences are, why they've changed, and do I think that Colt is cutting corners and maybe subcontracting this stuff out. So let me adjust the camera. We'll take a look at these two lower receivers, compare them, and I'll kind of give you my thoughts. All right, so these are the two lower receivers I'm going to compare. The one on the bottom is going to be the new production one that I just picked up. It's going to be the one with the A2 stock. The one on the top is from about 2012 or 2013, and it's an LE marked gun. So this one actually says Colt Law Enforcement Carbine, and on the other side is the restricted roll mark that a lot of people like. And these upper receivers are all considered to be made by Colt. All the parts, everyone completely agrees, and both of these are in their stock configuration. So I have not altered these in any way. These are with the factory lower parts kits. Everything, as you see, is the way that I purchased them. So, as I said, these are the two ones that I'm going to compare. I've only hid the serial numbers just for, kind of I guess security reasons, but I will tell you that the serial number on this particular upper starts with LE, so it's an LE 6920 upper. This one down here is a CR prefix, so it's the new CR rifles that, as I said, I'm not even sure what they stand for. Could be civilian rifle. I have no earthly idea. So let's just talk about what I see on these two lower receivers starting out. Number one, on the older Colt, you can tell that all of the roll marks on this are actually roll marks. It's an actual stamp. The markings are extremely deep. They're very clear. And sometimes even on the serial number, there'll be at different depths, then that's just because roll marks and stamps are really hard to apply evenly. I actually like the look of roll marked stampings. It just looks like there's pride and time that went into making it. So you have the marking on this side, you got the safe and fire, Colt Defense, Hartford, Connecticut, and on the other side here is where we have the restricted law enforcement marking. And you can even see that some letters in this are deeper than others, like this E here is a lot deeper than the Y in military. So you can just tell that that was hand done, or it was just a standard roll mark. The new lower receiver is all done obviously with lasers, and you can tell because everything in here is at an even depth. It looks very clean, very crisp, and the font is different. I'm kind of surprised they didn't try to match the font as well. Something else that I do not like about this, which I think is really cheap and chintzy, is that they mark this as just carbine. People have been saying that they wish it said M4 carbine like it used to, or M4A1. This is just extremely cheap and, in my opinion, very lazy. But if you're going to be doing laser engraving, you can put on something a little bit nicer than that. But the depth of these are just not as deep. They do have the new, required by, I guess, the Department of Defense, the new dot matrix code. So that's something the other receiver doesn't have. But all that has to be applied, of course, by a laser engraver, which would have the serial number and the manufacturer's information. So does this mean that this is not made in the Colt factory? No, it does not. It just means that maybe they've upgraded their machining and they bought a laser engraver, which would, if you're thinking about producing a lot of rifles, would actually be able to help you turn out more guns quickly and more effectively. So does that mean this isn't made in Hartford, or this is not made by Colt? No, it does not. But I do like the look of the other stampings. So let's talk about the forging marks. This one from about 2012 does have a forging mark. Here it has the keyhole right here. So the forging for this was made somewhere, and I'd have to go look and see what the keyhole meant. I'm sure somebody in the comment section below can look, and maybe I'll put it in the description. But you'll find these little markings on many AR-15 parts, especially for the uppers and lowers, because they're kind of rough made by other companies and aluminum forgers, and then Colt would finish them. The new one does not have any type of forging mark on it at all. So it is completely clean. So I don't know what that means. Maybe they're not required to anymore, but this does not have any forgings on it at all. So what that means, no idea. So from an external standpoint, nothing on this seems to tell me that this was not made in Connecticut or not made by Colt. It just might be they have changed their manufacturing process and bought a laser engraver. So now let's look at some of the other parts. This is where people said that they may be farming out work or doing subcontracting work. One of the things about Colt safety selector switches and factory ones that I've noticed versus many other lower parts kit and other manufacturers is that their safety selector switch has always been a little bit longer than other companies. If you ever buy a lower parts kit from like CMMG or the like, that's a military spec parts kit, these always tend to be a little bit shorter. Both receivers in this case have the long lever, and they're both marked on this side the same way, where you have an S marking on the selector. So both these guns have this particular marking right there. So that seems to say that they're made by the same people. I think the dimensions look the same. The markings look exactly the same. There's no markings on the trigger itself. So both sides are clear. Same thing here. And the dimensions appear to be about the same. I don't see any manufacturing differences between them. So that seems to tell me that that might be made in the same place. But one thing that is easily seen as being different is going to be the hammer. So on this older Colt, you can see some of these markings here. I believe both of these say S on them right there. And I'm sure some other machinists could tell me what those mean. I always know that these are the markings of Colt hammers. If you ever see the double S's there, and I do know that sometimes on this side you'll see numbers. In this case we have a 2. I'm trying to get in frame here. So we have a 2 that is stamped right there on the hammer on this side. But when it comes to the other receiver, on this side we do not see the 2 stamped S's. We also notice that the hammer has a different profile. So this is sometimes referred to as the CMMG style of hammer because it is rounded here. There's no notch. For some reason, Colt for a long time put this little notch in here because I'm assuming they were trying to show that the hammer is not a full auto hammer, which would normally have a hook on the back that would catch on the auto sear. But they've always notched their hammers this way, which actually caused a problem with the 9mm subguns and things. This would actually catch on the bolt. And so what a lot of people would do when they would build 9mm guns is they would change out the hammer to one that is rounded like this one here. So that tells me this is probably not a Colt part. It is also finished differently. This authentic Colt is kind of a dark gray. This one is more black. On the other side, we have some different markings here. This one is not marked with a 2. It says G. And there's like a sideways 8 here. Maybe it's an infinity sign. I doubt that, but I think it's the number 8 and a G. So this hammer here is definitely not made by Colt. It is subcontracted out by somebody. I don't know who that is. But being that this is a factory gun, or the way I bought it, and it has been not altered by myself or the person or the FFL that I bought it from, this says that Colt is definitely buying their hammers and probably some of the other smaller parts within the lower from somebody else. Does that mean that this gun is any less quality? Probably not. There are many companies that are very competent in making lower parts, but if you are a true Colt enthusiast and collector and you're paying a premium for these rifles, you probably want to make sure that all the parts are made in-house. So this tells me that some of the parts in the lowers are not made in-house. Is that a deal breaker for some people? I definitely think it is. When it comes to the safety selector, in this case on this side, now this is the newer designed ones where they are ambi. This is the correct design for the Colt military contract selectors. And on this side, I don't know if I can get this on camera here, but over here we do have the cage code, which is 13629. So that says it's made by Colt, and that would be correct for that part. It's very small, and it's on this right side of the safety selector. So that has to mean that part was made by Colt. They're only supposed to put the cage codes on if it's actually made by that particular company. If it's contracted out, they do have to put a different code on it. So I believe the safety selector is made by Colt, but the hammer definitely is not. So that gives me just a little bit of pause. So the lack of the forgings and the fact that it has a different hammer definitely means that I think they're kind of cutting corners a little bit. I can't say for sure, but yeah, this is definitely an aftermarket hammer here. Now let's look at the machining inside of the lowers. So if I show you the lower here from about 2013, we see that it does have the famous, or I guess I should say infamous, auto sear kind of block. Many lower receivers will not have this, and they even have the thicker walls here. So Colt definitely does not want you to be able to put in an auto sear in this thing, even if you are an SOT. You got to do a lot of milling to get that out of there. And so a lot of times, in fact, Colt's the only company that I really know that does this. Every other company, they might have the thicker walls here, but they definitely do not put on this shelf. So let's take a look at the new lower. The new lower also has the shelf in it. So it seems to be milled the same way, and when I compare them side by side, they also appear to have about the same dimensions, and pretty much exact, which probably means these are made on the same programs, on the same CNC machines. That's just what I would think. I just think if they were going to farm out these lower receivers to other companies, that the other companies would not take the time and mill that out. They would just keep it legal, and probably milling out this whole section in here would be cheaper, faster, and more effective. So that to me is evidence that this might be still made in the Colt factory and the lower itself, and not farmed out to somebody else. Everything else on this gun seems to be correct. The only difference is I noticed that when it comes to some of the ledges and around the support here in the back, this is the receiver extension support, that the ledges seem to be a little bit more smooth on both sides of the receiver here. So you can see this is where the spring comes through. It's rounded. Now if I show you the older one, these ledges seem to be a little bit more defined and more sharp. So I think the CNC machines that made this took a little bit more time, or the machinist took a little bit more time, but everything is correct on this other lower receiver. It just looks like it might have been either buffed or something to kind of smooth those edges out on both sides. So as I said, here's the kind of the sharper edges on the profile of the lower receiver. But once again, does that mean that this is made someplace else? No, it doesn't. They just may have changed machinery and they just kind of changed the program a little bit. Or I can tell you from actually working in a machine shop that as time goes on, tools will wear out, and you can have a little bit of variance from a gun or a part or whatever you're making from the first one to the last one in a series of 200, because as the cutting tools kind of wear out over time, you're not going to get the same tolerances, and you kind of have to watch out for that. So that's kind of the main differences that I see on these lower receivers. So my gut tells me that the lower parts kits for these guns are probably manufactured or bought from some other manufacturer. As I said, it's very obvious when it comes to the finish and the markings on the hammer itself. This is definitely not a Colt part. But there are many companies that make all of these parts. So I think probably to save time and keep the machines running, actually making the receivers themselves, they just farm out things like the pin, the bolt catch, the magazine catch, the trigger. I think those parts are all made out of house. In fact, even the finish on the bolt catch is dark like the hammer, but the safety selector is gray, the trigger is gray, so maybe those parts are actually made in-house. Maybe the finishes could tell us a little bit more about their place of origin. So I personally believe, after checking out this lower receiver, I personally think that the lower receivers themselves are really made by Colt in-house. I think that they've modernized their manufacturing process, brought in a laser engraver to kind of pump these out a little bit quicker. I don't know where the forgings come from because there's no forging marks on them, but that just might be the way that AR receivers are made today, and they just don't put the forging marks on them. But I definitely think that they are farming out the smaller parts like the hammer and things. So does that mean that the rifle is any less valuable or less collectible? Not really, I think. But if you really are an enthusiast, and of course if you're paying the higher end money for a Colt product, you definitely want as many Colt items and parts in that gun as possible. So if this is just a cheap old hammer that you can buy from, Brownells, not saying that Brownells hammers are bad, just comes from a type of cheap aftermarket hammer, I could see where that would bug me. This one's going to be a shooter though, so I'm not too worried, and I definitely think it's going to function. The only other thing when it comes to the fit of this I have noticed is that when I put an upper receiver on the older Colt, it fits pretty tight. There's not a lot of slop or wobble. But when I put it in, or put it on this gun here, I get a little bit more wobble on the A2 upper. It's just, I guess, kind of the nature of the machining of this one, or maybe the specs on the pin are just a little bit different. It works fine. It's definitely within spec, and it's going to run fine. I just notice it from putting it together, and it has a little bit more wobble. So there you go. So do I think that Colt's quality is any less? The answer might be no. However, the perception is yes, because you have, I said, the hammer and the parts that are made somewhere else. The laser engraving, I kind of think is lazy. They didn't even try to match up the font on those. So I'm not a font expert. I can't tell you what font these are. I don't like that one as much as the old roll stamps. I think it just looks cheap and looks chintzier. And even though the quality might be the same, your perception of the product can change based off of just the engraving alone. And that gives me, room for pause. Also the fact that they're so lazy, they just put carbine, even though this one, of course, is a rifle. As you can tell, it's going to have the rifle stock on it with a 20-inch barrel. So there you go. So that are my thoughts on the differences between these two and what I really think. So do I say avoid the new Colts? No, I think they're probably fine if you don't mind paying a little bit extra price for a mil-spec type of receiver, and of course getting the Colt name. But if you really value your dollar, I might go someplace else, especially if it's going to be a shooter, not a collector, and also if you don't like Colt for what they did for stopping civilian sales and also being a little bit cheap here. So that's my thoughts. So there you go. So what I know about the differences between the older and the newer Colt lower receivers, now that I have one in my personal collection. So there you go. So let me know if you have any questions and what do you guys think about the quality of the new Colts, and do you have any hope that CZ, who just acquired Colt, is going to turn this around? All right, so let me know if you have any questions, and as always, thanks for watching. Regarding the new Colt rifles for civilian production, why am I screwing this up?